Good morning.
Good morning, Sir Brian.
Ms. Scott.
Good morning, Mr. Lister. Can you hear me and see me?
Yes, I can. Good morning.
I'm going to ask you some questions now about the policies, disbursement policies that the Caxton Foundation had. Can we start by looking at CAXT 40108_023? So this is a discussion paper from September 2011. It's entitled Proposed Welfare Strategy. Do you know who wrote this paper?
I think this would have been Roger Evans, who would have written it as the first chair of the National Welfare Committee.
So we can see on the first page in the introduction that the Board of Trustees, as part of their remit, have to consider a strategic approach to dispensing relief to the Caxton Foundation beneficiary cohort. And then talks about the two distinct classes of beneficiaries, the infected and the non-infected. And then if we go down the page, please, to the bottom of the page there, 1.2 sets out the objects clause from the trust deed that we looked at yesterday. Objects are to provide financial assistance and other benefits to meet any charitable need of, and then sets out the classes of beneficiary to whom that applies. And then, Shamik, if we go over to the second page, to the bottom of that page, we can see a section entitled State Benefits, and at paragraph 2.2, it says charitable relief will in large part depend on the financial circumstances of the individual. The financial circumstances will mainly be reflected by the household income of the individual potential beneficiary, and where the potential beneficiary is in receipt of means-tested benefits, or non-means-tested, such as working or if in work, or in, I think it must mean then on non-means-tested benefits. It said means-tested benefits twice. All may well be considered income as far as discerning levels of financial relief are concerned. And then if we can go over to the next page, please. We can see the section halfway down, definition of poverty, defining need, the public benefit test. Para 3.1 makes the point, no absolute definition of poverty, what poverty might mean. Para 3.2, poverty can both create and be created by adverse social conditions, such as poor health and nutrition, low achievement in education, and other equivalent areas of human development. 3.3, the prevention of relief of poverty cannot just be about giving financial assistance to those who lack money. Poverty is a more complex issue that is dependent inter alia upon the social and economic circumstances in which it arises. It is therefore right to include in any strategy debate prevention of poverty with a financial contribution, but also the causes, prevention, and the consequences, relief of poverty. And then next paragraph, not all who are in financial hardship are necessarily poor, but it may still be charitable to relieve their financial hardship under the prescription of purposes relating to the relief of those in need by reason of youth, age, ill health, disability, financial hardship, or other disadvantage. And then if we go over the page, illustrations in the way that the foundation might relieve poverty, and then a number of different illustrations are set out, including money, domestic appliances, services, meals on wheels, entertainment, vocational training, debt counselling, benefits advice, etc. And then 3.5 says, Charity Commission's most commonly used threshold of measuring income poverty is now those on incomes below 60% of the UK median income, and that is said to be £22,800 per annum gross, with tax being on average £4,060 in income tax. And then if we go down to the second half of that page, the big paragraph starting the value of means tested benefits, etc., and then the last paragraph there, taking into account the mean income tax payment of £4,060 and applying a concomitant value of 55% of the figure 2,233, which is the notional gross income derived from benefits, is £9,773, or 3,947 below the 60% threshold. So do we understand from that anyone on means tested benefit wouldn't, according to the definition of the Charity Commission, be in poverty?
Yes.
And then if we go over to the next page, the bold at the top, 60% of the annual notional median income national median income is £13,680 gross. So again, to understand that the Charity Commission, that anyone below that level would meet the Charity Commission description of being in financial poverty.
Certainly, that's the that's one measure of it. Yes, I'm not sure if that's one that the Charity Commission,
I think we looked
accepted, but it's certainly a generally recognised acceptance that anyone below 60% of national median income is in poverty, and I think that 13,000 figure applies to a couple rather than a single person.
So we looked at on the previous page that the charity commission, the weekly gross income earnings of a full-time employee at April 2010 being 22,800, and I think this is the 60% of that figure.
60% of that would be 13,680.
Yes. And then if we go down to 3.7,
that of course is earnings, not income.
Yes.
So it's looking at those who actually have a job.
Yes.
And a full-time job at that.
And then 3.7, it would be reasonable to suggest that the Caxton Foundation regard the infected beneficiary cohort as poor because of their Hep C infection, in particular when undergoing treatment, and the non-infected cohort as similarly poor because of their affection, specifically in terms of the family dynamics arising by way of Hep C infection. Are those individuals able to enjoy a standard of living that could be considered comfortable or normal? The Commission's definition of poverty at 60% of the median income does not include a premium of living with Hep C or haemophilia. It will be a matter for debate as to whether or not a premium for the additional cost of living with Hep C, in particular when ill, is added to the income level where the Commission say need will arise. And then at the bottom of that paper it says, conclusion, this paper seeks to start a debate as to the direction of support the trustees may wish to take.
Just to add, it's possible that the paper was written by Martin Harvey. It would either have been Roger or Martin, or a collaboration between the two, I would guess.
So is it right to understand that certainly at September 2011, the author of this paper was considering that there may be a wide way of meeting needs, i.e. not just through financial provision?
Yes, indeed.
And also that the definition of poverty, again, is similarly being looked at with a wide lens. It's not simply looking at the financial position of a particular beneficiary, but considering the fact that they're infected by hepatitis C, or that they have a partner or in a household somebody that's infected by hepatitis C.
Yes.
Can I ask you? Can we look back at a provision on page 1 of this document and just ask you a question in relation to that? If we look at just before the Charity Commission, the object clause is set out, so the bottom half of the page, the need for the strategy, that paragraph, the need for the strategy to be able to accommodate exceptional circumstances will become clear, as will the need to adopt a degree of consistency as far as eventual policy is concerned in the disbursement of financial support. where did you understand the term exceptional circumstances to come from?
Give me a moment to think about that. I mean, I assume there could be a number of circumstances that could be considered exceptional. Eventually we went on to agree that we would look at everything on a case-by-case basis. At this stage, we didn't have really any understanding of the needs of our beneficiaries. It was only when we started to receive information about them through the National Welfare Committee that we began to sort of understand the situations that people were experiencing, and were able to then look at applying these principles and addressing exceptional circumstances when they arose.
So, is this right to understand that? Is this suggesting that there may be a requirement to have a test that policies require exceptional circumstances? It's putting that into the mix at this early stage.
Yes, I think so, yes. I mean, I don't think on something like this you could always apply hard and fast rules. We were dealing with a whole range of circumstances in which our beneficiaries found themselves, and I think it's a recognition that we needed to apply some flexibility to that situation.
What was, can you recall whether exceptional circumstances did become a test that had to be satisfied by beneficiaries in order to receive grants?
No, I don't think it. I mean, I don't think it did become a test as such. What we generally did is apply a sort of general test of what reasonableness when looking at applications. So no, I don't think people had to demonstrate exceptional circumstances at all. They needed to demonstrate that they had a charitable need, and that was usually demonstrated by income poverty. And I think, when I was talking about exceptional circumstances, I was thinking more of circumstances where, despite the rules that we applied, there were occasions when we needed to look at a case history and think, actually, we need to be more flexible here.
And we'll come on
so I don't think exceptional circumstances was intended to make it harder for people to apply. I thought it was a sort of a recognition that whatever rules we set down, there are always going to be exceptions to those rules that we would have to recognise.
And we'll look at the way in which the policy is developed as we go through. So show me you can take that down. I'm going to ask you to look now at the minutes of the first meeting of the National Welfare Committee on 21st of September 2011, and that's CAXT 5062_003. You can see there Roger Evans is the chair, you're present, as I say, it's the first meeting of the National Welfare Committee. It sets out there the membership code of conduct, the terms of reference. What were the terms of reference?
I don't think we can see that on the screen at the moment.
So, forgive me, yes, if we go down to the bottom of that document, the committee received and discussed terms of reference. Just generally speaking, what was the purpose and role of the National Welfare Committee?
In general terms, the purpose was to make decisions on applications received from beneficiaries for financial or other support from Caxton. There were some sort of delegated responsibilities, which meant that there were financial limits on the amount of money that the National Welfare Committee could agree to. I can't immediately recall what those limits were, but there was a point at which, if we wanted to award a grant over a certain amount, we would need to seek the permission of the chair of Caxton, and then above a further amount still, we would need to go to the full committee for agreement.
And was another of the role of the committee to develop policy and make recommendations to the board?
Yes, indeed it was, and you'll see as we sort of maybe look at later minutes, and certainly after I became chair, we had always had a sort of policy session before we started to look at individual applications, and those sort of policy discussions are all minuted.
Can we turn to page 2 of this document? See at the top there, application of principles. Committee received and discussed the principles agreed at the board meeting held on the 1st of September, and it was agreed and to recommend to the board that priority should be given to alleviating financial hardship and supporting education. What can you recall what was done in relation to the support of education?
I don't know if it falls into this category. We certainly were open to funding beneficiaries who wanted to retrain. For example, we gave grants to people who came to us and said, I want to train to be such and such, and in order to get back into work, and we would certainly support that. We also supported some dependents in full-time education up to the age of 21. So that those are two examples that I can think of.
And then 5.2, priority should be given to beneficiaries and families with an income not exceeding £14,000 per annum gross. Does that, as far as you can recall, mean both the infected community, or sometimes called primary beneficiaries, and the non-infected community?
Both.
Both.
And I'm sure as we will discuss that 14,000 figure, when it came to actually looking at real life applications, which we haven't seen at this stage, didn't ever really get applied. And to except in limited circumstances.
And to understand that £14,000 figure is a household figure, household income.
That is, I think, a household figure, yes.
Can you recall why the £14,000 was chosen as a figure? It's slightly over the Charity Commission 60% median income.
It was just a rounding up of that 13,600.
And then we see 5.3, assets and savings should be declared exceeding £10,000 and taken into consideration. Do you recall how such savings were taken into consideration?
I don't think it applied very often. There may, I can't think of specific cases here. There may have been circumstances, I guess, if somebody had come to us and they had substantial savings, we might have questioned whether there was charitable need. In practice, most people didn't have substantial savings, so I don't think it was an issue.
And then non-discretionary payments to applicants who are stage 2 need to be included as income. So that effectively, did it ruled out anyone who was receiving a stage 2 payment as being eligible for grants from the Caxton?
Again, this was a starting position. The assumption at the beginning with Caxton is that we would be primarily supporting people at Skipton stage 1 because they weren't receiving the stage 2 payments. However, we did provide financial support to some people at stage 2. And I think, as the figures will show, there's a set of figures, I think, at the end of year 1, which show a certain amount of grants going to people at stage 2. Again, when these recommendations were made, we hadn't begun to see actual applications from people and to sort of understand what their individual financial circumstances were. And in fact, just because somebody was receiving stage 2 benefits didn't mean to say that, that didn't mean that they weren't in charitable need.
And then top-up payments would not be made to beneficiaries. So does that refer to the fact that McFarlane Trust, for example, as we know, were making top-up payments to their primary beneficiaries who were getting payments at that stage through the MFET? But Caxton was saying at this stage that that's not something we're going to be providing.
Yeah, I think this is part of that cautious approach that I talked about in my witness statement, and I don't mean caution in a negative way. We were in a situation where we had we didn't know how many beneficiaries would come forward. We didn't know what their needs would be at this stage. We had a fixed amount of money, and so we weren't immediately going to go into providing top-up or regular payments, simply because we didn't know what need was and what was affordable.
And then lastly, their supplementary payments could be made to those beneficiaries, bereaved wives, partners requesting financial assistance. If financial assistance is agreed by the NWC, the sum of £250 per month would be paid in respect to the first child, and £100 per month for the second and younger child, but only for an interim period. Do we understand that this is as you say, a cautious suggestion that there may be some supplementary payments or regular payments that could be made to certain categories of beneficiary for a limited period of time?
Yes, in actual fact, what we ended up doing is making the regular payments we made to begin with were for people undergoing treatment, because we didn't want people to be discouraged from undergoing treatment by loss of income, and we provided a monthly sum for that. And later on, there was sort of more discretion in individual circumstances to provide payments for people who needed that support. So again, this developed as it went along, and certainly we didn't feel as a committee constrained by these initial recommendations, which is why periodically we went back to the board to say, this is what's happening, these are the situations that people are in, and these are the approaches that we are considering taking. And
the focus is very much on financial poverty here. We saw the discussion paper and a wider consideration of different types of poverty, but by the time at this early stage, very much focusing on financial poverty. Is that something that remained the case throughout your time at Caxton?
Yes. I would say so. Yes.
I'm just going to take you now to the first annual report, which sets out what actually was done in that first few months until March 2012. If we can go to CAXT 5034_010. We can see their annual financial report from October 2011 to March 2012, and 1st of October 2011 is when Caxton Foundation started operating, is it?
Yes, that's correct.
Can we turn to page 8 of that document, please? Well, in fact, yes, can we in fact turn to page 7? Support to primary beneficiaries. we can see there the charity law dictates Caxton may only provide financial support where charitable need can be determined. The trustees therefore gave priority to requests for help from households with an income below £14,000 in line with the definition of poverty adopted by the government of household income below 60% of median income. And then skip a paragraph. At the outset, the trustees believed their discretionary support was most usefully focused on those who either had undertaken treatment to clear the virus or were undertaking treatment to clear the virus, since this has side effects that can severely impair income earning ability. And then at the bottom of that paragraph, one-off fuel payments have also been made automatically to beneficiaries with a household income below £14,000 and on a discretionary basis to households on higher incomes. And then if we turn over the page, the last paragraph before support for non-financial beneficiaries, during the period under review, Caxton provided financial support to 85 primary beneficiaries amounting to a total of 366. Nearly half, 483 pounds. Yeah. So that reflects what you're telling us, I think, in terms of the regular payments you did make were to those with undergoing treatment.
Yes, although I'm not sure we had made any of those payments in this period. I think the first of those maybe came a little later, but I can't be certain.
And then we look at support for non-infected beneficiaries. In this first period of Caxton's operation, priority was given to helping primary beneficiaries. However, Caxton has already received a number of requests for assistance from those who have been bereaved following the death of a related primary beneficiary. It's not been possible to assess definitively the type of support that Caxton can expect to make available to the non-infected community. And then if we go down to the last paragraph in that section, we can see that Caxton provided financial support to 9 non-infected beneficiaries, totalling amount of £30,000. So in that first period, is it right to understand that the infected community were prioritised over the non-infected community?
Yes.
So just then trying to understand what the Caxton policies were, I think in the early period, I think we've seen for a primary beneficiary household, they could make applications for one-off single grants if their household income was less than £14,000 per annum.
Yes, although I don't think we held to that, to be honest. We used the 14,000 as a benchmark for giving the winter fuel payment, but I don't recall ever saying somebody can't have support because their income's over 14. There were circumstances where people's income was substantially more than that, where I think we will have declined support, but we didn't have an entirely strict cut-off at 14, ever, I think.
And certainly that is reflected in the annual report of the following year, March 2013, where it says in there that while there was a cut-off, if you like, of £14,000, that hasn't been applied, and that reflects what you've just told us, does it?
Yes, absolutely. And this is again about sort of essentially using our discretion and basing our judgments on the evidence of need from the applications we received, and not being bound by those earlier discussions.
And equally, though, the infected beneficiaries, as we've seen, winter payments, yes, certainly if you have an income of less than £14,000, perhaps on a discretionary basis if you have income of above £14,000 in that early period. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. As you know, later on, we made the winter fuel payments available to all registrants.
Yes, so is this right, that there seems to have been a period where I think in your witness statement you put it. You say that by November 2012, the winter payment is no longer a means-tested benefit, and is available to all
Correct.
registrants. So that would include infected beneficiaries and non-infected beneficiaries.
Absolutely.
So then, picking up on what was available for the non-infected community, we've seen that in theory, at least, they could make applications for grants if their household income was below £14,000 at the very early stage, but Caxton were pretty cautious about granting those in those early months for the reasons that you've outlined. Is that a fair way of putting the support available to them?
I think that's probably a fair way. I mean, I don't know how many we actually received, so I don't know what proportion of the applications we receive is represented by those 9 non-infected beneficiaries. So I can't recall, whether we gave support to 9 out of 9, or whether they were a small proportion of those who applied.
Certainly, by the time of the annual report in the year ending March 2013, there's no suggestion that there is a priority given to the infected community over the non-infected community. So,
not at all.
So, is it your recollection that prioritisation ended fairly early on in Caxton's life?
Yes, it is. I mean, we simply looked at every case we received on its own merits and didn't distinguish between the infected and the non-infected.
So a non-infected beneficiary would have been able to make an application for a single grant to the Caxton in the same way as an infected beneficiary could from fairly early on.
Yes.
We heard, and I think you mentioned in your evidence earlier that there was assistance available to adult children of beneficiaries who were in full-time education, either until, I think you said, the age of 18 or 21. Is it right to understand that there was no assistance available to those adult children once they had either reached the ages of 18 or 21 or left full-time education?
That's correct. That's a policy decision we took. I can't remember exactly when, but most policy decisions were taken on the basis of application. So I think at one point we received an application from someone who was the child of a primary beneficiary who was now somewhat older than 21, and at that point we had to decide: does this person qualify for support or not? And on the basis of that decision, we then end up with a policy that we apply to all future applications.
And why? What was the reason for that policy?
I think the reason for that policy was simply that if somebody is the child of a primary beneficiary and is now over the age of 21 as a sort of independent adult, we didn't feel that they would qualify for support from Caxton simply because of that. They were now, as I say, independent adults out of full-time education, and we couldn't see that there was any charitable need that we could apply in those circumstances.
Even if they could show, for example, that they were in financial need?
Yes, I suppose there would be a question then about how much that financial need was related to the fact that one of their parents had hepatitis C as a result of contaminated blood. And I think that would be perhaps hard to demonstrate.
Well, suppose you had a case in which the spouse of the infected person had died. The child becomes over the age of 21, has finished full-time education, but considers, for obvious reasons, that the care required by mum or dad, whoever is surviving, requires his or her time to be spent. Now that's a case which, if one was operating a strict, bright-line policy, nobody over 21 who is independent as an adult will get benefit. Is that not a case which would attract your attention, or would it? Did you have such a case? I don't know.
I don't recall such a case, but then I don't recall every single case that we looked at. We certainly always were prepared to look at exceptional circumstances against any rule that we laid down, and I'm sure we would have looked at somebody who was would given up work to be a full-time carer for an infected parent, but that may not have been doing much more than providing support for respite, for example.
While we're on that point, is that right, that in terms of the support that carers could apply for to Caxton in their own right, that was limited to respite breaks?
That was, yes.
And that was the case throughout your time at Caxton?
That's correct. And indeed there was some considerable discussion about this with the partnership group, particularly again around our speed of response to requests for respite, which we did try to address.
Can I take you now to CAXT 40109105, which is a minute of a Caxton board meeting of the 1st of November 2012. And we can see that Mr. Stevens is chair at this point, you're present. If we turn to page 3 of that minute, this is a question in relation to the regular payment scheme. The board received a paper considering the introduction of a regular payment scheme to Caxton beneficiaries. There followed a lengthy discussion surrounding the issue that would need to be clarified before such a scheme could be properly considered. It was concluded that a concerted effort needs to be made to contact the 2,000 plus potential beneficiaries who received a Stage 1 payment from the Skipton Fund, but who have not yet applied to the Caxton Foundation. Any top-up scheme can only be looked at realistically once a defined number of beneficiaries is known. Is it right to understand that this was, in effect, the barrier to the Caxton Foundation implementing a regular payment scheme earlier than it did?
Yes, I think that's a fair reading of that. I had forgotten that actually before I read this again. Again, I think that caution coming into play, that we don't know how many potential beneficiaries we've got, so it's premature to consider a regular payment scheme. The paper that I produced, I think actually was it was a presentation, and the set of slides are part of the documents that
yes,
we've received.
Do you want to look at it? It's CAXT.
Is it worth having a look at those?
If you want to look at it, it's CAXT 40109_085.
But I think it's useful just because it illustrates where we were at 1 year on from Caxton. So by then, yes, we had 551 registrants, and 54% of our beneficiaries who'd given us information on household income had an income under 15,000. And I sort of give a breakdown of the profile of the beneficiaries and some suggested sort of outcomes or objectives that I thought we should be aiming for. So we should have, well, it says fewer beneficiaries are living below the poverty line. I think really that should have been our aim should have been no Caxton beneficiaries living below the poverty line. That we want people to receiving their full entitlement to benefits and other support. That there was a sort of, our aim certainly as a welfare committee was to try and provide support that would enable beneficiaries to achieve independent living. I think we recognised that the fact that we were a charity, the fact that people had to apply for charitable aid was uncomfortable for many. So if we could use our support to reduce the need for that, so much the better. And that was, for me, a big argument for having a regular payment scheme. And as well as that, for people to be able to manage their finances and personal debt. So I think the next page was suggesting where we might go from there.
So you've got the slide there, possible actions.
Yes. So again, I think my theme of communicating better what we can offer, looking at new approaches, for example, a regular payment scheme, ensuring that whatever we do, we're reflecting the increased cost of living with hepatitis C. So, the recognition that if you're looking at the official poverty line, that does not take account of the increased costs of living with hepatitis C. And then I just went on to look, I think I'd been exploring at that stage the Roundtree minimum income levels. That was something I recall that one of our board members had suggested we take a look at. And then I think on the following slides, looking at what a possible regular payment scheme might involve.
And so you're looking there at the income that particular households would need to live on.
Yeah, that was based on the Roundtree minimum income level. I mean, later on we decided, when we were trying to put a business case to the department, that was perhaps unaffordable as an aim initially, and we went back to looking at the household income, the official sort of government household income figures. But that was an interesting way. I spent a lot of time talking to the people who sort of do that research on minimum income, sort of understand the sort of basket of goods that they included in arriving at those figures. And I think the thought at that stage that what we really need was a regular payment scheme, but that recognising that would not mean that people would not need one-off support for things, so that we would continue to require a system of one-off grants paid on a discretionary basis.
Can we just turn to the last page as well, just to look at that last slide there? You've got there the McFarlane Trust discretionary top-up payments. So you were aware, were you, in taking into account the fact that your sister charity, if I can put it that way, were providing these kinds of payments to their beneficiaries?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I was sort of obviously made it my business to know exactly what McFarlane Trust were providing. In their case, most of their payments were for top-up, and the amount of income they had, the amount of money they had to provide for discretionary grants was relatively small compared to Caxton's. I think so. Yes, we were certainly aware of that as a comparison.
And just to go back to the point then that's made in those minutes, that the impediment to progressing with this regular payment scheme was the concern about, well, look, there may be an explosion in numbers of beneficiaries. is this related to the dependency concern, that if one put in a regular payment scheme with on the basis that there were however many, I've now forgotten the number, 550 beneficiaries at that stage, and then suddenly there were an extra 1,000, that the beneficiaries would have become dependent on the regular payment, and then it may be taken away from them?
Yes, I think that was certainly always part of the consideration. I think that the recognition that if we were going to go partly as well for a regular payment scheme, this would require a business case to the Department of Health, that it would cost more than the 2.38 million allocation we currently had from the department, and we would need to base that business case on a realistic assessment of the beneficiary numbers. And I think the difficulty as well is that it's not only not knowing how many beneficiaries Caxton might have ultimately, but knowing how many of those had household incomes that would qualify for a top-up payment. So a lot of missing information at that stage.
Why was it that even if Caxton couldn't, as you say, put forward a credible business case to the Department of Health and implement a regular payment scheme in those early years for the reasons you've outlined, why was it that the Caxton couldn't at least disperse its full allocation during those first few years to those beneficiaries who you say in your statement you were shocked that some of them were living on such low incomes, rather than those monies being returned or being retained, I think is probably more accurate, by the Department of Health?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I think that there was an issue about concern about I think the concern was simply the one that we've discussed, and a concern about fairness. So we could decide to sort of give a fixed sum of money to our poorer beneficiaries, but if numbers grew, we wouldn't necessarily be able to continue that for a second year. In practice, that maybe shouldn't have been a reason for not taking a little bit of a risk and providing that additional support with, making clear that these were one-off payments. But we didn't.
My last question on the regular payment scheme is just a point of clarification. Mrs. Lloyd told us that the regular payment scheme, when it was applied equally to both the communities, the infected community and the non-infected community. Is that your recollection?
That's certainly my recollection as well, yes.
I'm going to ask you some questions now about loans. Were there ever, do you recall, any discussions either on the NWC or at board level about whether loans should be offered to beneficiaries?
There was discussion, and we concluded that we wouldn't provide loans. McFarlane Trust provided loans and recovered the amounts lent through their top-up payment scheme. So Caxton didn't have a ready way of recovering loans. We didn't in practice have that many applications for loans. Those that we had, I think, were related to mortgages, and I think were at a level we didn't feel we could support. So generally, yes, there was a policy that we wouldn't offer loans, that we would focus instead on helping people out of debt.
I'm going to ask you a question now about assisted conception. I'm going to take you to the office guidelines in due course, and we can look at it now if it assists. But the first set of office guidelines, certainly that the inquiry has from 2012, includes grants for assisted conception. But is it right to understand that that was removed from the office guidelines in about 2013?
That is correct, yes. I mean, the office guidelines that we inherited, as with much at the start of Caxton, were essentially the Macfarlane Trust office guidelines, which we adopted. So there were things in the office guidelines that we removed, not many actually. I think maybe assisted conception was the only one, and others that we later added. So we added things like microwaves and televisions, I think, later on.
And why was it that that assisted conception was removed from office guidelines?
I think the consideration was that assisted conception was there for the Macfarlane Trust community because of HIV being a sexually transmitted infection, that assisted conception was a way of beneficiaries having children without the risk of transmission to a partner. And that did not apply, at least not to anything like the same extent, to people with hepatitis C.
Was advice obtained from Professor Thomas in relation to that issue about the transmissibility of hepatitis C through sexual contact?
I don't recall, to be honest.
Did you have any applications for assisted conception, to your recollection?
We may have had one.
And can you recall whether that was before or after it was removed as an available
I think
grant?
I think if we had one, we would have declined it and then taken the policy decision as a result of that.
I'm now going to move on to ask questions about debt, and I'll take you first to the paper that you mentioned yesterday that you thought it would be useful to look at. It's CAXT 40109_029. It's entitled Addressing Beneficiary Debt, and if we go to the end of the last page of that document, it's got your name on it, and it's dated the 20th of April 2012. So if we go back to the first page, we can see that the purpose of the document is because over a third of cases coming to the National Welfare Committee are from people seeking debt relief from debt of various kinds. And then sets out NWC has already agreed financial assistance in a number of these cases and has formulated a broad debt relief policy, which is set out down below. However, as debt relief will continue to be a significant call on Caxton resources, the NWC wishes to engage the full board in discussion on our attitude and approach to debt, and the board is asked to agree to the appointment of a counsellor specialising in debt and money management who can advise beneficiaries, etc. And then the paper goes on to set out what the general approach to debt relief is. And if we go to the bottom of that page, it says the NWC looks at each case individually, but as a general rule has focused its support on and then sets out those categories of people, people with the lowest household income, people who demonstrate they've already taken steps to reduce their debt, situations where clearing some debt will help beneficiaries get their income and expenditure back into balance, people with council tax and utility bills which are already in arrears, and then we go over the page. And then the point made about negotiating down debts where possible, and then setting out where assistance has been declined, people on higher income who appear to be making no effort to reduce their reliance on credit, people living above their means where there is the risk of ongoing dependence on financial support from Caxton, people who have borrowed money from friends or family members, people who have incurred frivolous debt. And then you go on to set out the different types of debt that have been that beneficiaries are experiencing. Can I just ask you some questions about this concern about people living on above their means, where there's a risk of ongoing dependence on financial support from Caxton? Was that another concern of Caxton in relation to dependence?
Yes, it was.
And what was the concern?
So I think, again, as ever, we are, I think, talking about a small number of cases of people who, had a good income before being affected with hepatitis C and had not necessarily adjusted to to living on a lower income. And I think we felt at Caxton that it wasn't part of our role, given the remit of charitable relief, to try and maintain somebody's previous income levels. So that was part of the concern.
And was there anything?
I think as well, and these judgments were always rather difficult because we had, a limited amount of information about what was going on for people, and it was all often, slightly uncomfortable to try and sort of we wanted obviously to sort of be as supportive as possible, and certainly not to be judgmental, and on the whole we didn't ask questions about why people had incurred debt, but if people were clearly sort of relying on debt in order to, or seem to be relying on debt to furnish a lifestyle that they've been used to previously, and there was no indication that if Caxton sort of paid off a debt that wouldn't reoccur, then I think we had concerns about that. And these were all reasons why we didn't feel able to support people, but we felt that with the support of a debt counsellor, those people in this category who we weren't able to help at this stage, we might be able to help if there was a plan in place that enabled us to do that.
Is there anything else you want to say about this document?
I don't think so. Part of the reason as well for sharing this with the board, apart from getting agreement to our proposal to have a debt counsellor, was that I was always concerned. We were a small group relatively on the welfare committee, and I always wanted board members to sort of have an understanding of the issues that were facing the beneficiaries that we were here to support. So often, part of these updates for the board about the situations were to give people a sort of window into that situation. I think there's a little reference about mortgage debt and secured loans as well.
That's page 3. That's top of page 3 of the document. So that says that these have to be looked at on a case-by-case basis, again using the general approach outlined above. For example, we would look more sympathetically at a case where a beneficiary had already downsized to adjust to reduced income than one where a beneficiary was persisting with an unaffordable mortgage.
Yeah. We didn't generally agree to pay back loans made by friends and family, as it says, but again, there might be exceptional circumstances where we could do that, and similarly, we didn't normally agree to pay back student loans. But on the previous page, there were things where I think we did feel, for example, if people got themselves into loan shark debt, which is another one
page 2
mentioned, that in most cases we were likely to try to sort of clear that. I mean, ideally negotiate that debt down.
So we can see that at the bottom of page 2. Given the devastating impact of loan shark debt, we are likely to recommend in most cases that Caxton clears the debt, subject to negotiation with the lender to reduce the amount owed.
Yeah. And the reference to frivolous debt sort of comes up in the section above about credit card and catalogue debt, etc. Again, there really wasn't too much example of that. I recall we were asked to pay for a car that somebody had bought that was, I don't know, something like 18,000, and we thought that was, not something that we were prepared to do. I don't actually record anybody having gambling debts, but that was there as an example for something that we wouldn't wish to support. And as it says, there's an argument that we should first insist on seeing all credit card statements so we could satisfy ourselves that money had not been spent frivolously. But, that would be maybe a step too far, given that we were already seen as already too intrusive.
Is that a step that the Caxton took, asking to see past credit card statements?
No.
Can I just?
No, I think we recognised. I think we simply recognised that, for a lot of people, given their poverty, that debt was almost inevitable in order to maintain any kind of standard of living, and that people were in that trap. But of course, debt, as we all know, in itself brings physical health and mental health problems on top of the physical and mental health issues around living with hepatitis C. So it was really an issue that we were very, very keen to tackle.
Can I ask you a question about what's at the bottom of page 3 of that document, which is entitled Debts to be Cleared After the Death of the Primary Beneficiary, and it's a short section. There may be circumstances where a widow inherits debt of which she was previously unaware. We would look sympathetically on such cases. First of all,
yes.
What was the issue of widows inheriting debt a big problem for Caxton? Is that a common problem?
No, not a common problem, but one we anticipated, and I think there was one case that came back to the board on a number of occasions involving a widow, but no, it wasn't a common problem. But we could have. There were certainly circumstances. I mean, I know of one case where somebody discovered they had hepatitis C, and very, very late on, and it wasn't only a few months later before that person died, and then the widow had to cope with all of that, and you can imagine those circumstances that someone might not have time to put their affairs in order, even if they were able to.
Shemit, you can take that document down. The response to this, what was the response to this, to engage a debt counsellor?
Yes.
And was that Penny Smart and Jane Bellis?
Well, it was indeed. Up until then, we'd relied on members of staff to try to negotiate debts down where possible. But given the extent of the problem, the number of people coming to us with debt, the complexity of some of those issues, it certainly wasn't sustainable for this to be dealt with just by our small staff team. So it seemed a good idea to engage a professional debt counsellor, and as you say, that was Penny Smart.
And did it become? Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's all right. I was only going to say that there was, that role was advertised, and we had an interview and a selection process. So that's how that company came to be appointed.
And did it become a condition of receiving help from Caxton for debts that a beneficiary would accept a referral to Penny Smart?
Not always, but sometimes.
And why was that?
Because there were circumstances where people were not managing their debt situation well, even with support from Caxton, and that might have been for a number of reasons. A number of our beneficiaries suffered from brain fog, so it was perhaps not surprising that they might have difficulties managing their personal finances. Other people, well, I suspect people with other people perhaps were never terribly good at it. I don't know, but I think there were circumstances where we felt we wanted to support people, but what we didn't want to do was be in a continuous situation of supporting payment on debt without some resolution to it. What we wanted to do in a lot of cases was find a solution for people that would allow them to sort of get back on their feet, and there were circumstances where we could do that without referral to the money management advisor. If it was a sort of single debt and it wasn't terribly high, then we would usually support clearance of that. But there were circumstances where people had debts with multiple lenders, and either there was no obvious way out for them because most of their income was going on paying off the interest on debts, or people were not clearly sort of taking steps themselves to get themselves out of that situation, either because they wouldn't or they couldn't, and in a lot of cases it was probably because they couldn't. So I think in cases where we had tried to help, it hadn't been successful. There were circumstances certainly where we did say, look, in order for us to provide further help with you, you do have to see the debt counsellor. The good thing about that, I mean, I do understand that there were some people who found that unacceptably intrusive. But in all cases where Jane was involved, we were usually able to come to a good solution. She would come back to us saying, okay, this is what I've been able to do. If you, Caxton, provide X amount towards relieving this particular debt, then that can be part of a negotiated package. So it really did enable us to provide support where in the past we would have found it far too tricky, or without those insights and that support for individuals. And a lot of people did find it helpful. A lot of people welcomed it.
Was it a condition of repayment that the debt had to be related to hepatitis C?
No.
So we'll look at a document later which suggests that that's the case, a document that was published on the website. Perhaps I'll come and ask you about that when we look at that document.
Yeah, I mean, that shouldn't have been. I think to begin with, there was this notion that it should be related to hepatitis C. We dropped that pretty soon. I think there was similarly a feeling that at the beginning that maybe we should be looking for evidence that people's poverty was related to hepatitis C. And I certainly took the view that if people were poor, they were poor. It didn't matter whether that was because of hepatitis C or because of any other reason. It was the poverty that was the key issue, and that's what we should be helping to alleviate. So that may have been the case in the early stages, but not for long.
I'm going to read you a couple of sentences from your witness statement and just ask you to explain to us how this works. You say in your witness statement, it's fair to say that, though, that our own principles were also one reason we did not spend more on discretionary grants. And you give another example, and then you say this. Similarly, some people came to us with debts which we decided not to totally write off, but rather we worked with them to help them manage the debt with some write-off from us. So what were the circumstances in which you would, because of your own principles, only write off some debt, not all of the debt?
Well, I think in a number of cases, maybe the majority of cases, we didn't always write off all the debt. I think in some cases the people's debts could be very substantial, so we used Jane to find a way, for example, of consolidating debt when people had debt with several lenders to make it more manageable, to negotiate down debt, to arrive at a sum which the beneficiary could afford, assuming that Caxton also wrote off an element of the debt. So if you like, the principle was really helping people to sort of manage their financial situation better, to get out of a debt trap where every penny they had almost was being paid on servicing debt, and to get them into a position where that was more affordable for them, with support from us and support from Jane in managing that. Does that help?
I'm going to ask some questions about the policy on retrospective grants now.
Right.
I can take you to the document if it assists, but there's a meeting minute from November 2013 from an NWC meeting which states that Caxton will stop allowing retrospective grants save for in exceptional circumstances. And I just wanted to understand the reason. What was the reason that Caxton adopted that policy in November 2013?
Okay, well, when Caxton started, a lot of the initial grant applications we received were retrospective, and we kind of accepted that because people knew that Caxton was about to start and may have sort of committed expenditure in the expectation that they would receive support for it. I think our concern was that if we were there to assess charitable need, which we were, that if somebody had already made a purchase and then came to us to sort of reimburse that, it was a lot harder to demonstrate charitable need. People are saying, well, I could afford to buy this, but now I'd like you to give me the money to support that. That wasn't then allowing us to make any kind of judgment on the basis of individual need. Now, there were some circumstances, I think, where we felt that a retrospective grant would be justified later on. So I should say that so once Caxton was established, once people understood the process, and this was something that I think McFarlane Trust had adopted as well, that people should essentially apply for something before they buy it. And that's a principle we wanted to adopt, because otherwise it was very hard to assess charitable need. And we gave some leeway to that at the beginning because people were anticipating the arrival of Caxton and coming to us for things that they've already purchased. But we didn't feel 18 months in, whenever it was we made that decision, that there was any longer any justification for that, unless something was so urgent that people had no choice but to go and spend the money and then come to us retrospectively. So we certainly gave retrospective grants for funeral payments, for example. I think if somebody's partner had died and they had gone ahead and paid for the funeral, then we looked, I think, very sympathetically at people who then come back to us and ask for support for that. There would, domestic emergencies might be another circumstance where we would accept that something could be retrospective.
Why was it assumed that just because a person had already paid for something, they were not in financial need? For example, what if somebody had to pay for something, but they'd used the money that they would otherwise have paid for their rent or for their utilities?
I think that's a fair point, but even so, to have any assessment of, these are discretionary grants, they're based on charitable need, and the only reasonable way of trying to assess those is if people put in an application before they spend the money. And given that we were expecting, I think there's a principle of fairness as well for beneficiaries. On the whole, this is what we were expecting beneficiaries to do, and this is what the majority of beneficiaries did. I think, it's so given the system that we had, I don't think there are many grant-giving organisations that would give a grant after the money was already spent, just because there's no opportunity to make any assessment on that. So people might come to us for, particular household goods or whatever it is, and, we would award what felt like a reasonable sum of money depending on their application. If they'd already gone and bought that and paid whatever for it and said, now reimburse it, please. As I say, it's just so much harder to say, well, was that a charitable need or not?
So I'm noting the time. I think I've got about 40 minutes of questions left with Mr. Lister. I don't know how you would like to proceed.
Yes, well, we'll take a break, and come back then at 25 to 12. That I hope gives you long enough to have a cup of coffee or whatever, and those watching to do the same.